It's with great pleasure that I get to introduce Danny Cathcart and Tom Klein, who I can already tell you are hilarious and have told me I'm cute, so they have very good aesthetic taste. Danny and Tom met as philosophy undergrads at Harvard. Apparently they met in their very first few days, did you say? Yeah, very first few days. They remained friends ever since. They kind of went their own separate ways career-wise. Danny pursued a life of writing and has written comedy for the greats of Lily Tomlin and Flip Wilson, has written a huge number of fiction and nonfiction books. Thank you. Tom managed healthcare organizations and studied theology. They came back together to write several bestseller popular philosophy books that use humor to explain philosophical issues. They are, and you will have heard some of them, I certainly have, Plato and a Platypus Walk into a Bar, Aristotle and Aardvark Go to Washington, and Heidegger and a Hippo Walk through Those Pearly Gates. Please join me in welcoming Danny Cathcart and Tom Klein, the philosophy guys. We're going to give a talk entitled, Is It Ethical to Make Big Bucks with Philosophy? And God, I hope so.
I just might make a small correction here. My name is Danny Klein, and he's Tom Cathcart. It's just a little different. So it's arbitrary, really. So this guy is making love to his best friend's wife when they hear a car come up in the driveway. It's the husband. So this guy, Sam, he jumps out of bed, stark naked, and he hides in the closet. Just then the husband comes through the door, strolls over to the closet to hang up his coat, opens the door, and there he sees his best friend Sam standing there, stark naked. He says, "Sam, what are you doing here?" And Sam says, "Everybody's got to be somewhere."
So Danny calls me up, I don't know, a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, more than that, I guess now, and tells me this joke. And I said, Danny, we both majored in philosophy. And I said, Danny, there's a little philosophical subtext to the joke. And he said, what is it? And I said, well, Sam, the guy in the closet, is giving a Hegelian answer to what was supposed to be an existentialist question.
Which is pretty obvious, actually.
This is probably the only audience we've ever talked to that had any idea what the hell I'm talking about. But, we explain to other audiences, as we don't have to explain to you, that Hegel did philosophy from up in the sky somewhere, looking down on the whole sweep of history, and looking from the point of view of the absolute. And he can make grand abstract pronouncements like everybody has to be somewhere.
Yeah, Hegel always reminded me, maybe you're too young to remember Bette Midler. Do you remember Bette Midler? And she sang this song, "From a Distance." And, and the body of the song was, "From a distance, everybody looks just great and everything, but close up they look like shit," was the basic idea of the song.
Yeah, which is sort of the point of the existentialist critique of Hegel, right? It's all well and good to say, oh, we see how it's all working together, synthesis, antithesis, blah, blah, blah. But, as human beings at the human level down here on the ground, it doesn't work that way. We have dread, we have anxieties, we have depression, we have, fear of death. We have all this stuff that Hegel isn't sort of taking into account, or he's kind of blurring over. So anyway, Danny told me the joke, and he said,
I said, I bet you there's a book in that. Jokes that explain the basic philosophical concepts, the kind of Phil 101 concepts. And Tom said, no.
I said there are four. I remember the number 4. I said there are 4 jokes that do that. I don't know where I got that number. I said there are 4 jokes that do that. I said, no, there are hundreds.
So anyhow, we went away, he at least agreed to test my thesis, and we went away for a weekend with a pile of our old philosophy books and a pile of joke books. I know a lot of jokes. I mean, I can't remember my first wife's name, but I can remember every joke I've ever heard.
Beverly.
Oh. How is she? But anyhow, so sure enough, we found jokes that illustrated and sometimes nailed the basic philosophical concepts. Sometimes they just illuminated them, but we found lots of them. And so on speculation, I'd written a lot of books. Mostly I'd written thrillers and mysteries. It's a living. And so I said, let's write this book on speculation. That's something you can do in the publishing business. You write a whole book on speculation and see if you can sell it. The other way is you just offer a book proposal to a publisher and they decide then. But we thought there's no way we can do a book proposal. We have to do the whole book. We did the whole book. We gave it to our agent, and she got 40, count them, 40 rejections. And they all pretty much said the same thing. Boy, this is clever. This is interesting. But who gives a flying hoo-ha about philosophy? Nobody's interested in philosophy. This book will not sell. Well, the 41st publisher, Abrams.
Are we being attacked?
Is it something I said?
Just got to give a little bit more distance.
From a distance. Can you still hear me? It's good. I have hearing aids in. I don't know what's going on. So the 41st one, Abrams, actually an art imprint, took it because they were starting a new division that had cartoons and more pop stuff. And so we were kind of their pilot book. And 3 weeks later, it was number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. And that was very nice. And then all kinds of wonderful things happened. It got translated into 30 languages and became bestseller in France and Italy, Israel. And there's one funny thing. My daughter is in publishing, and I'm always trying to impress my daughter. And it's hard going. She's very hard to impress. And we had gotten a call that we
Maybe you're just not very impressive.
Yeah, well, that's the other reason. I'd gotten a call from our agent that we'd become a bestseller in Bulgaria. And so I immediately called my daughter at her office and I said, guess what? Your dad and your Uncle Tom have a bestseller in Bulgaria. And she says, that's great, Dad. That means you sold 7 books. That's not very nice. Okay.
So what we were asked to talk about, as you know, is the question, is it ethical to make big bucks in philosophy? And the answer is yes. So let's get that off the table, and let's go to the question that you're really interested in, right? How do you do it? And
the answer to that is you have to get very, very lucky.
And we did. We got very lucky. Our publisher sent a copy to Leanne Hansen, who used to have Weekend Edition on NPR on Sundays. And so out of the blue, we were like number 2,234, I think, on Amazon. And, the publisher was tickled pink. They thought that was great. They'd been selling these books of the Italian Renaissance, and they weren't used to numbers like being number 2, 2, 3, 4, so they were happy. But so anyway, we went on the show, and we taped it on a Friday, and it was broadcast on a Sunday. So I looked about an hour before we went on, before it was aired on Sunday, and sure enough, it was 2, 2, 3, 4. And so then the segment played, and I thought, oh, I'll look again and see if there was any movement. It was number 3. So I called Danny. I said, you're not going to believe this. It's number 3. So it went on, as you know, to become blah, blah, blah on the New York Times bestseller list. So luck is the answer to that question. How do you do it? You get very, very lucky.
Anyhow, let's get to the book itself, which we really had fun writing. We're old pals. We've been best friends for 60 years. We've, in many ways, Tom's smarter than I am, and he's a better philosopher, so he's kind of shaped me intellectually. I'm a little funnier than he is.
Yes, that's up to you to judge.
Yes. Anyhow, so when we got to the book, we discovered that jokes illuminated or in times explained the basic 4 categories of philosophy: logic, epistemology, metaphysics, and evaluative philosophy, ethics, and aesthetics. And so let's start with how we did that with metaphysics. Those, as you all know, are the big questions about why are things the way they are, even the basic questions of what does it mean to exist.
So if you're going to look at metaphysics, obviously you should start with Aristotle's Metaphysics, which we did. So one of the big questions that Aristotle posed was, what are the characteristics that make a thing what it is, what he called their essential characteristics, right? He said everything has essential characteristics and accidental characteristics. The essential characteristics tell you what a thing is. The accidental characteristics might tell you how a thing is, or sometimes it tells you something about the thing, sometimes it doesn't. There are all kinds of variations, but in any case, it doesn't tell you what the thing is. So his example was Socrates. You remember this? How many people remember this? One person remembers this. That's very good. So he said Socrates was essentially rational, right? So he said, if you were walking down the street and you bumped into somebody and you thought you were talking to Socrates, and then it turned out you were talking to somebody irrational, you weren't talking to Socrates, because Socrates is essentially rational. It's part of his essence. He said, on the other hand, he said Socrates had a snub nose. So he said, that's an accidental characteristic. He said, if he had, nose surgery.
Rhinoplasty.
If he had a rhinoplasty, you wouldn't say he's no longer Socrates. You'd say he's Socrates with a nose job, right? Okay, so that's the distinction, as you all remember.
So here's a joke. Very old, very old. It's a joke riddle. Tom, what's green, hangs on a wall, and whistles?
Green, hangs on a wall, and whistles? I have no idea.
A herring.
A herring? A herring isn't green.
You put some paint on it, it's green.
Oh, come on. A herring doesn't hang on the wall.
You put a nail through it, it's on the wall.
Well, a herring certainly doesn't whistle.
Yeah, so it doesn't whistle. This is old shtetl humor. I love it. So here's another gag about the confusion of essential and accidental characteristics. It's about this guy Thompson, who is my age, 78. Oh. And so he decides he's going to try to, beat the odds here. He's going to get young again. He's going to live longer. So what he does is he gets a personal trainer, and he gets a personal dietitian, and he takes 7 inches off his waist, and he puts 5 inches on his pecs, on his chest, and he gets a tan, and he's looking terrific. He buys some sporty young clothes, and he decides to top it all off with a sporty haircut. He goes to the barber and says, give me a sporty, young haircut, gets a haircut, steps outside of the barber shop, and he's run over by a bus. So, yeah, that's funny already. So he's lying there in the gutter, dying, and he looks up and he says, God, how could you do this to me? And a big voice from above says, to tell you the truth, Thompson, I didn't recognize you.
So it's kind of a funny philosophical twist on that joke. He seems to have changed certain accidental characteristics of himself, right? He still knows he's essentially Thompson, or he wouldn't be asking the question. We still know he's essentially Thompson, or the joke wouldn't work. The only character in the joke who doesn't know that he's essentially Thompson is God, whom you'd think was essentially omniscient, right? But no. All right. So, as you know, metaphysics, particularly in the English-speaking world, has fallen into some disrepute, or I don't know, disrepute. It's fallen off in the last century or so. But back at the beginning of the 20th century, Alfred North Whitehead was still doing serious grand plan metaphysics. And he wrote a book called Process and Reality. Anybody read that, Process and Reality? Anybody read that anymore?
Maybe they don't read it
anymore. Yeah. Whitehead was a mathematician, of course, and he had read all of the new scientists. He'd read Einstein's theory of relativity. He'd read all the stuff about quantum studies. And so he knew that reality couldn't be described anymore as a static thing. he said reality is really a process. It's unpredictable, it's unfolding, in this quantum crazy way that it's not at all like what we thought it was. So he said, theologically, that sort of means that God doesn't know how to predict it either. So he's learning as the universe evolves.
An evolving God.
An evolving God, yeah. So here's a story that kind of illustrates what such a God would look like. Alvin owns a little clothing store in the Bronx. And one day he's in his store, and he hears a booming voice again. And the booming voice says, Alvin, sell your store. And Alvin says, sell my store? But my store is doing fine. Why would I sell it? The booming voice says, Alvin, sell the store. Alvin says, who's going to give me a lot of money for the store? He says, Alvin, put your store on the market for $3 million. Alvin, $3 million? That's crazy. Alvin, just do what you're told. So Alvin puts a sign on the front door of the store, business for sale. 5 minutes later, a guy walks in. He says, I kind of like this business. He says, I think I'd like to buy it. He says, I'd like to offer you $3 million. Alvin goes, really? Okay. So he said, actually, he says, I happen to have it here in cash. And so he pulls out a suitcase, and he says, there's $3 million in bills here. And he said, it's yours, and see you later. So Alvin's walking out of the store. He can't believe it. Can't believe his luck. Just as he gets out on the street, he hears the booming voice again. And the booming voice says, Alvin, take that suitcase, go to LaGuardia, get on a plane, fly to Las Vegas, and I'll tell you what to do when you get there. So Alvin says, okay. So he gets on the plane with his suitcase full of $3 million, gets to Las Vegas, walks into his hotel. As you know, you can't really get into your hotel without walking through the casino. So he's walking through the casino, and the booming voice says, Alvin, take your suitcase full of money, take it to the blackjack table, and put the whole wad on a single hand. Alvin says, no, please, no. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. This is crazy. So booming voice says, no, do it. So he goes over to the blackjack table. He lays out all his money in a single hand. The dealer deals. Alvin's got 18, and the dealer has a 6 showing. So he's feeling terrific because that was good advice. Thank you, Lord. The Lord says, no, Alvin, I want you to take a hit. Alvin says, I've got 18. He's got 6. He says, take a hit, Alvin. So Alvin says, okay. Give me a hit. So takes a hit from the dealer. It's an ace. Now he's got 19. Oh, thank you, Lord. Good. Okay, I'll stand pat. The Lord says, no, you won't. He says, I want you to take another hit. He says, oh, God. Okay, give me another hit. Takes a second hit. It's another ace. Now he's got 20. He's thinking, oh, my God, this is terrific. Thank you, Lord. I can't believe my blessings. The Lord says, you're not quite done yet. He says, I want you to take a third hit. Alvin says, are you crazy? I've got 20. She has a 6 showing. Alvin said, the Lord says, please just do what you're told. So he says, okay, give me another hit. It's a third ace, blackjack. And the booming voice says, unfucking believable.
That's an evolving God for it. When we got to the subject of logic, which, is an increasing importance in the last 150 years, we were afraid we wouldn't find jokes. It turned out to be the most fertile area, not only for jokes that illuminated logic, but were spot on, that were just spot on. They don't, like the first law, all of you know, of the law of non-contradiction, something both can't be A and not A at the same time. Otherwise, you can't have rational discourse. You can't do anything rational. And there's an old shtetl joke about it. It's from the old days when in these little villages, the rabbi did all the decision-making about politics. And so Shmuel comes in and he says, Rabbi, Moshe here is taking his sheep across my land, and they're ruining my crops. They're trampling everything. They're trampling the wheat. He shouldn't be allowed to do that. And the rabbi says, you're right. And then Moshe stands up. He says, Rabbi, without going across the land, my sheep can't get any water. Without any water, they'll die of dehydration. And anyway, it's been forever that this has been a right of way, that anybody can take their livestock to this pond, so I should be allowed to take my sheep across this land. And the rabbi says, you're right. And then the cleaning lady in the back of the synagogue says, but Rabbi, they both can't be right. And the rabbi said, you're right. That's the joke. Okay.
So the cleaning lady obviously is saying that the rabbi has violated the law of non-contradiction. A statement is contrary can't both be true at the same time in the same respect. So for a rabbi, violating the law of non-contradiction isn't quite as bad as violating the law about coveting your neighbor's maidservant, but it's close. It's up there. So, ta-da. So another story that illustrates the law of non-contradiction and what happens if you violate it is this one. An Irishman walks into a Dublin pub. He sits down at the bar and he says, bartender, I'll have 3 pints of Guinness if you would. And the bartender says, sure, lad. And he pours him 3 pints of Guinness, sets them down in front of him. The guy takes a sip from the first one, sip from the second one, sip from the third one. Then he goes back to the first one, second one, so forth. And he keeps doing that in that order until they're gone. And then he says, bartender, I'll have 3 more pints if you would. And the bartender says, well sure, lad, but could I make a suggestion? They'd be much less likely to go flat if you ordered them one at a time. And the guy says, oh, I know that. He said, the reason I do it this way is, he said, I have 2 brothers. He says, one of them's in the States, one of them's in Australia. And he said, we decided when we parted that we would always drink like this in memory of the days when we used to drink together. And the bartender says, why, that is a lovely, lovely custom. So he pours him 3 more pints. Guy drinks them the same way, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, finishes them all, pays the bill, and walks out. Well, he becomes a regular in the bar. Every night he comes in, sits in the same stool, orders the same way, 3 pints of Guinness, drinks them the same way, orders 3 more pints of Guinness, drinks them the same way, and leaves. Well, after a couple of weeks, he walks in one night, takes his usual seat, and he says, bartender, I'll have 2 pints of Guinness if you would. And a hush falls over the bar. The bartender comes over and says, oh my God, lad, please accept my condolences. The guy says, oh, no. He says, everybody's fine. He said, I just became a Mormon and I had to give up drinking.
It's the law of non-contradiction again. You both can't drink and not drink at the same time. This is also known as self-serving logic. As I'm sure you all know, Aristotle wrote an entire compendium of logical fallacy thousands of years ago. But this apparently doesn't stop people from committing these fallacies all the time. Particularly popular among politicians for some reason is circular reasoning. And there's a great story about this, which involves a Native American tribe whose chief, this new generation of chief, instead of learning the old ways, he's sent off to Dartmouth, a terrible mistake. And when he comes back to assume his duties as chief, he doesn't know any of the traditional ways of the people, And so when they ask him, is it going to be a cold winter? He doesn't know how to, so he kind of shrugs and he says, yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty cold winter. And so the tribes people gather a bunch of wood, but the chief is feeling very nervous about this. He calls the National Weather Service and he says, what kind of a winter is it going to be? And the guy at the National Weather Service says, I think it's going to be pretty cold. The guy's kind of relieved, and so when comes back to a meeting with his people again, they say, so what's the latest about the weather? And he says, yeah, it's going to be a cold winter, definitely a cold winter. And so they gather some more wood, and then he's again feeling shaky about this, what it's setting off, and he calls up the weather service again, and they say, even it's going to be even colder than we expected. It's going to be a pretty cold weather, quite a winter. And goes back and he reports that it's going to be an extraordinarily cold winter, and they gather more wood. And, now he's really starting to feel shaky, but so he calls up the weather service again, and he says, what's your prediction now? He says, well, I think it's going to be the coldest winter we've ever had. And the chief says, how do you know? He says, well, the Indians are gathering wood like crazy. Circular reasoning. Okay.
Another fallacy that turns out to be a goldmine of jokes for some reason is post hoc ergo propter hoc, described, of course, by Aristotle 2,500 years ago. Why he named it in Latin when he wrote in Greek, I don't know. You scholars will have to set us straight on that one. But in any case, after this, therefore, because of this, because event A happened after event B, the conclusion is that A must have happened because of B, and of course that's fallacious. But you hear it all the time. You hear politicians in particular use this one. How many times have we heard politicians say, marijuana may not be bad in itself, but it's a gateway drug, right? Because 80% of heroin addicts started off with marijuana, which is apparently true. But 100% started with milk.
Yeah.
Right?
So you might want to cut down on your milk. So here there are, who would think that there would be dozens and dozens of post hoc proctor hoc jokes? Here's my...
No, before you go, can I go? I want to go.
Okay, go. You go.
Because yours is a topper.
Oh, okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, a Gentile man is marrying a Jewish woman. And a couple weeks before the wedding, she comes to him and she says, honey, she said, I have kind of a big request to make of you. She said, I hope you'll consider this, but I wouldn't be surprised if you say no, but I have to ask you, it would be very important to my mother if you would convert to Judaism. So the guy thinks about it, and he says, well, yeah, sure. If it's that big a deal to your mom, I'll convert. Just tell me what I have to do. She says, well, I don't really know everything, but she said, of course, you'll have to become circumcised. He goes, circumcised? Whoa, wait a minute. At my age, she said, isn't that going to be kind of painful? And she says, well, I don't really know. So he calls up a male Jewish friend of his, and he says, well, listen, he said, I'm going to convert to Judaism. And he said, I have to be circumcised. He said, tell me, does it hurt? The guy says, well, I was 8 days old when I had it done, so I can't remember whether it hurt or not, but I'll tell you this, I couldn't walk for a year afterwards.
Post hoc ergo proctor hoc. Now can I tell mine now?
You go.
Now I get to tell my joke. This is my favorite. If you don't like it, I'm walking out. Okay. So again, it's a guy my age, and he marries a younger woman, as I did. And it's a very pleasant marriage. It's very nice, but he just cannot satisfy her in bed. And it's becoming a little bit of a problem in the marriage. So he goes to the rabbi to ask for advice. And the rabbi says, well, he says, we've seen this before, and we have a solution for it. He says, what you do is you go home, you get a younger man to wave a towel over you while you're making love. Your wife should have a really good time. He goes home. He's got this young, muscular guy, lives downstairs. He hires him, gets into bed with his wife. The young guy waves the towel. He goes at it with his wife. She feels nothing, zero, zilch. It's not working out. He goes back to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, yeah, that sometimes happens. He says, we can make a little adjustment in it. He says, what happens is you'll go home, and you wave the towel, and you put the younger guy in bed with your wife. The guy says, okay. And the younger guy gets in bed with his wife. He starts waving the towel. The younger guy and the wife are making love. They're screaming. She's yelling. She's screeching with pleasure. And all of a sudden, the older guy looks down at the younger guy, and he says, schmuck, that's the way you wave a towel. That is the original post hoc joke, Tommy.
I told you it was a topper, right? Okay. Okay, moving along to epistemology. And it turns out epistemology has a lot of jokes. Who would have guessed that? There are a lot of epistemological jokes, starting with The epistemology of the Middle Ages.
Yeah, the middle, the big, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the big question was, is reason trumped by divine revelation or vice versa, The standard theory was divine revelation is tops. So there's a story, yet again, of a guy my age who's walking through the woods. He's walking along, he stumbles, and he falls into a hole. It's an old abandoned well. He's dropping yards and yards, hundreds of yards. He's flailing around. Finally, he grasps onto the spindly root coming out of the side of the well. And he holds on for dear life. He looks up. All he sees is this circle of light at the top of the well. And he says, "Is there anybody up there?" Nothing. No response. "Is there anybody up there?" Nothing. "Is there anybody up there?" All of a sudden, it gets dark. There's a thunderbolt. And then there's a voice of God that says, "I am the Lord your God. Have faith in me, and I will save you. Let go of the root." Is there anybody else up there? Okay.
So, of course, in the end, it wasn't either pure reason or divine revelation that carried the day. It was really empiricism, right? By the 18th century, philosophers, Hume, Berkeley, Locke, were becoming clearer and clearer that neither pure reason nor divine revelation could really give you new information about the exterior world. That in order to gain facts about the exterior world, one needed to observe the world. And of course, that philosophy went on to underlay the scientific revolution and so on and so forth. But in addition to observing the world, it wasn't enough, according to the empiricists, to just, receive all this sense data, as they called it, and, just record it. You had to do something with it. You had to interpret it. You had to relay all of your new observations to your old font of knowledge. You had to perform interpretation. And so there are a number of jokes that illustrate what happens if you merely observe the world and you don't do that interpretive piece.
I think we decided you'd tell this joke.
Did we?
The Sardar joke, yeah.
Okay, I will.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, this joke is a little politically incorrect. We know that there was a session on offensive humor earlier in the day. We weren't there, so we're innocent. We have no idea. Actually, this is from a store of jokes that you're probably all familiar with from the internet, of Sardar jokes from India. Sardars are apparently Sikhs, something we didn't know when we copped these jokes off of the internet. And we did get a little bit of reaction from a couple of Sikh readers, but they were very friendly. They said, we're supposed to be offended by this, but there are websites after websites after websites of these Sardar jokes out there, so we forgive you. So in that spirit, I will tell you a Sardar joke. So this chief of detectives was looking for a new detective at an opening. And so 3 Sardars applied for the job. And so he said to them, "I'm going to take you each aside and I'm going to give you a little test. And that will determine, whether or not you get the job, whether you're qualified for the job. And whoever gives me the best answer will get the job." So he takes the first Sardar aside and he says, "I'm going to show you a picture of a suspect." And he says, "I'm going to show it to you for 5 seconds. I'm going to put it down. And then I'm going to ask you to tell me something about the suspect. What did you conclude?" So he takes the first Sardar aside, shows him the picture, puts it down, picture of a man, puts it down. He says, "Okay, what did you see?" And Sardar says, "Well, this guy's going to be easy to find." He said, "He only has one eye." And the chief of detectives says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "The picture's in profile. That's why you think he only has one eye. Don't call us. We'll call you. Goodbye." So he asked the second Sardar to come in. The Sardar looks at the picture for 5 seconds. He says, okay, well, what did you observe? He says, well, so I could pick this guy out of a lineup. He says, he only has one ear. Chief detective says, are you nuts? No, the pictures are, go away. So he has the third guy come in. He says, gives him the same test, puts the paper down. He says, now what did you observe about this guy? The Sardar says, well, the man obviously wears contact lenses. The chief of detectives says, well, that's an interesting answer. So I'm not even sure myself whether he wears contact lenses. So he goes into his office, gets into his files, and comes out and he says, by God, you were right. He said, the man does wear contact lenses. He said, how did you know that? And he says, well, with one eye and one ear, he couldn't wear glasses.
Okay, you want to do your empiricism joke, and then I'll pick up a little slack.
Okay. So the triumph of empiricism is such that if somebody, we take it for granted, it's our default position. If somebody tells us something that purports to be a fact, we just take it for granted that they know that either by their own observation or somebody else observed it and told them or whatever, but we know that it comes from observation and not from prayer or pure reason. So here's a story that illustrates how it's become our default position. 3 women are standing together in their locker room of their country club. And all of a sudden, a man goes running through the locker room. He's stark naked except for a bag over his head. And as he runs through, the first woman looks him up and down and says, well, at least it's not my husband. The second woman looks him over and says, no, it isn't. The third woman looks him up and down and says, he's not even a member of this club.
Okay, moving on to Immanuel Kant.
Yes. So, as everybody knows, after the period of the British empiricists, probably the next major figure in epistemology was Immanuel Kant. And one of the distinctions that Kant famously made was between what he called analytic statements and synthetic statements. He said, as you know, what he said is analytic statements are those that are true by definition. All horses are animals. You don't have to go look at the world to see whether that's true. All you have to do is look up horse in the dictionary, and it says a horse is a kind of animal. The other kind of statement, of course, is synthetic. Synthetic statements in general, as you Kantian scholars know, there are a few exceptions in Kant, but for the most part, a synthetic statement has to be verified empirically, has to be verified a posteriori. And so he said, like some horses are lame. You're not going to find that out by looking up horse in the dictionary. You're not going to find it out by looking up lame in the dictionary. You've got to go out and look at actual horses, and if some of them are lame, you can say all horses, or some horses rather.
In some ways, this parallels the first thing we talked about, the difference between essential and accidental characteristics in Aristotle, which is about objects. This is about language, describing.
But yeah, basically the same distinction. Yep. Okay. So.
Oh yeah, we got a joke. No, this shows you that we are cleverer than you thought, or than we thought. We found a joke that illustrates the difference between synthetic and analytic statements. Can you believe that? Wait. So a guy goes into his tailor. He's ordered and measured for a bespoke suit, a tailor-made suit, and he goes into final trial.
Mr. Klein, try this on. I think you're going to like this jacket very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh my God, that is you. That makes a statement.
Definitely.
I love it.
The sleeves are too short.
Too short?
It's too long. I'm too short. Okay.
No.
The sleeves are too long. What kind of tailoring you call those?
No. You're just holding yourself on. Here, hold that hand up like that. And same thing with this one. Let's go that way. Okay, that's good. Okay, what do you think?
Yeah, well, the sleeves are okay now, but I can feel it's hanging down over my butt. What kind of a fit is it? You call that a fit?
No, wait. You're just standing on. Here, bend at the waist, maybe a little to the left. Perfect. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, now the collar's riding up on my neck. What can you call this?
Well, that's because you don't have your head back. Here, put your head all the way back. Keep the body down, head back. Okay. Mr. Klein, please give my name to your friends. So as the guy walks out of the shop, there are a couple passers-by see him going out. And one of them says, "Oh my God, that poor deformed man, my heart goes out to him." And that guy says, "Yeah, but this tailor's a genius. He fit it perfectly with that suit."
Now, why is this, and definitely has to do with synthetic fibers, why does this illustrate the idea of analytic and synthetic statements, Tom?
Well, Dan, since you've asked, the second observer, Dan,
Yeah.
thought he was making an empirical statement. He thought he was making a synthetic statement. You know, he was observing the fit of the suit to the guy. But from the tailor's point of view, it was an analytic statement because he knew that by definition, all his suits fit the guy.
Because he makes the man fit the suit.
Bingo.
Oh, I told you it was brilliant. We wrote another book. We wrote a few more because they paid us. And the one that we probably enjoyed in an odd way, even more than Plato and a Platypus, was the third in the series called Heidegger and a Hippo Walk Through Those Pearly Gates. It was about the philosophy of mortality, death in theology, and dead in general, and which is very fertile material for jokes. When we were researching areas that philosophers were talking about, we came upon this business of people who were scientists, and there was just a big article in the New Yorker I saw about scientists who are trying to extend life, and then some scientists who want to take it a step further and make you live forever. And they have some clues, none of which will include us, I'm unhappy to tell you. But if it were, one of the problems is that none of these people would take an existing human being and reverse their aging and then make them live another 100 years. But,
So Denny and I would be 77 forever.
yeah, which has certain drawbacks, which I will illustrate. So again, there's a guy about my age, and he's walking down the street, and he hears somebody says, "Hey, old man, hey, old man." He looks down, it's a frog. The frog says, "Hey, old man, pick me up, kiss me. I turn into a beautiful princess, and we'll make love, passionate love, all night." So I picked up the frog and put him in my pocket, and I kept walking for a while. And the frog says, "I don't think you heard me. Turn up those hearing aids. You got to kiss me. Then I turn into a beautiful princess, and then we make love all night." And I said, "I heard you, froggy. At my age, I'd rather have a talking frog." It's a sad joke, actually.
Sad story. Well, there was a book, some of you may remember this book. It appeared in the 1970s by a guy named Ernest Becker. It was called The Denial of Death. Anybody remember that book? It won a Pulitzer Prize, actually, but the sad part was that before he heard that he had won the prize, he dropped dead.
Yeah.
But his thesis was that the denial of death, our tendency to put it off and try not to look at it,
Or to make up mythologies to say it doesn't exist.
Right, has horrible consequences. And one of them is that because of the fact of death and our fear of it, we try to find something to grasp onto, to belong to some tribe or to adopt some ideology that will blunt that feeling of death, and that will make us feel like we're immortal. We identify with something other than ourselves. And it's caused by the fear of death. But there's a problem with that, and that is, and we're seeing this right now, obviously, in the world, the problem is that if I have my entire existence, all my hopes and dreams staked on my tribe or my ideology, and you have all your hopes and dreams and all your anxieties invested in your ideology or your tribe, then at some point we're going to come into conflict, because I'm going to say, well, if his is right, then mine must be wrong. And so that's how, according to Becker, we get wars and all kinds of terrible things. So we have, religious hostilities in the world between Sunni and Shia, between Muslim and Christian and Judeo-Christian, I guess. And we have tribal stuff in, Rwanda and so forth. And he says that's why. So here's a story. This is a story that was originally told by Emo Phillips, a comedian in the 90s. Anybody remember Emo Phillips? Is he still around? Oh, terrific. Okay. Here's the story. I was out walking one night, and he said I was crossing a bridge. And all of a sudden, he said, I saw there was a man standing on the railing of the bridge. He was about to jump. And so he said, I ran up to him, and I said, well, whoa, wait a minute. Don't do anything rash. Let's just talk here for a second. I'm telling you, there's a lot to live for. The guy says, there isn't anything to live for. Leave me alone. I said, no, listen to me. Are you religious? The guy said, yeah, I'm religious. I said, I'm religious too. I find meaning in that. I'm religious too. Tell me this. What religion are you? Are you Christian? Are you Jewish? Are you Buddhist? Are you Muslim? What are you? And the guy says, I'm Christian. He said, look, stay with me here. You can always jump later. Just listen to me a second. I'm Christian too. Let's just continue the conversation here for a minute. He said, are you Protestant? Are you Catholic? Are you Greek Orthodox? What are you? The guy says, I'm Protestant. He said, I'm Protestant too. I'm Protestant too. Let's just do this a little longer. I'm Protestant too. What denomination are you? The guy says, I got you here. He says, I belong to a tiny sect called the Baptist Church of God. I said, that is unbelievable. I must have been sent here tonight to save you. I belong to the Baptist Church of God. He says, let me ask you this. He said, are you Baptist Church of God traditional or Baptist Church of God Reform? And the guy says, well, I'm Baptist Church of God Reform. I said, I'm Baptist Church of God Reform. I said, let me just ask you one more question. Are you Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1876 or Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1919? And the guy says, well, I'm Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1876. So I said, die, you heretic scum. And I pushed him off the ledge.
Good story. In the Christian tradition, the way of dealing with Becker's notion of denial of death has been heaven, an afterlife. And a lot of it has been made of since the new, has been configured after the New Testament, particularly the idea of what's the name of the gatekeeper?
St. Peter.
St. Peter at the Pearly Gates, and then he's making, he's the adjudicator of who comes in and comes out. Well, you're the biblical scholar. How much basis of that is there?
Yeah, well, obviously it's not a biblical idea. There's nowhere in the Bible that says St. Peter is tending to the pearly gates. It's a mishmash of a bunch of stuff that's in the Bible. At one point Jesus says to Peter, you're Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And of course he means, you're going to have a big role in ushering in the kingdom of God. He doesn't mean you're going to have keys to a gate. And then in the book of Revelation, it says that in the New Jerusalem, each gate is made of a single pearl. So that's the pearly gates. So all of a sudden, out of this mishmash, we get Peter as a bouncer in a fancy nightclub or something.
And what's interesting about it is that it has become so much part of conventional wisdom, largely not, so obviously not for biblical reasons, but because it's mostly cartoons. It's a standard cartoon setup, just like the one guy on an island, or the guy in the analyst's couch. The idea of somebody at the pearly gates being decided whether by St. Peter whether or not he can come in. It's standard cartoon and children's book and Hollywood material, but it's not biblical in origin. But it has provided terrific jokes, just great jokes. And one of my favorites is about this guy who comes up to the pearly gates, and St. Peter's, is hoping to get in. And Peter says, well, we've looked over your life, and, there's nothing really convincing here, one way or another. You know, it's pretty blah life, actually, you know. Is there any story you can tell us that would, you know, tip the scales? And the guy said, well, he says, you know, there was that time I'm driving along and I see out the side window of my car that this gang of motorcyclists, this motorcycle gang, are just about to assault this woman on the street. So I stop my car and I go up to him, and just the leader of the gang comes out, and he's this guy, he's a foot taller than I am, rippling muscles, he's got tattoos, and he's got one of those rings through his nose. And he says to me, well, I say to him, I said, you better stop that. You shouldn't do that to this woman. And he says, well, who's going to stop you? And I said, I will. And I grabbed that ring in his nose and I ripped it out. And St. Peter says, that is really impressive. He says, when exactly did that happen? He said, about 3 minutes ago.
Okay, one last St. Peter story. This is our last story of the day. So 3 guys are standing outside the pearly gates waiting to get in. And St. Peter comes out and he says, you know, he says, we're having a little bit of an overcrowding problem today. So he said, I'm only going to be able to let you in if you had a really bad day. And I says, I know you all died, but besides that, before that, did you have a really bad day? So he takes the first guy aside. He says, what kind of day did you have? The guy says, oh, you wouldn't believe it. He said, I had a terrible day. He said, I live on the 6th floor of my apartment building. I said, I was out on the balcony. He said, I was doing aerobic exercises, and he says, I was doing jumping jacks, and he said, all of a sudden, I lost my balance, and I went hurtling over the banister. He said, so I was flailing around as I was falling down the 6th floors, and he said, I reached out, and just by luck, I happened to grab on to the banister of the 5th story balcony. So he says, I'm hanging on for dear life, thinking, oh my God, I'm really lucked out here. When all of a sudden, this maniac comes out of the 5th floor apartment. He's got a hammer. And he starts hammering on my fingers. And so he says, I lost my grip. So he said, I fell all the way to the ground, but fortunately, I landed in a big bush. And it really broke my fall. So I'm thinking, oh man, I've been blessed twice here. This is incredible. But just then he said, I looked up and he says, the guy in the 5th floor apartment has brought his refrigerator out onto the deck and he dumps it over the railing. It lands on my chest and kills me. But he said, that's how I died. And St. Peter says, well, my God. He said, that is a bad day. He said, you should go in. So he takes the second guy aside and he says, tell me what kind of day you had. He says, well, it was the worst. He says, one of the worst days of my life. He said, I've had this feeling for a long time that my wife was cheating on me. But he said, you know, I could never catch her in the act or anything. I didn't know who the guy was. I never saw him, but I just had a feeling. So he said, today, I thought I'm going to go home from work early and see if I can catch them in the apartment together. So he said, I left, went in the door, and he said, my wife was there. I didn't see the guy anywhere. You know how sometimes you just have a feeling that there's another person in the room? You know, you don't know what that's about, but you just have that funny intuition. Well, he said, I knew he was there. So he said, I went into the bathroom, and I looked behind the shower curtain. He wasn't there. He said, I looked under the bed. He wasn't there. So I looked behind the drapes. He wasn't there. He said, I looked in all the closets. He wasn't there. So finally, he says, I walked out on the balcony. My God, there he is. He's hanging off the banister. So he said, I'll fix that son of a bitch. So he said, I went in, I got my hammer, and I pounded on his fingers. He lost his grip, and he fell down to the ground. But wouldn't you know, he landed on a bush. So he said, I went and got my refrigerator. I dumped it over the railing, and it landed on him and killed him. But in the act, he said, lifting the refrigerator caused me to have a heart attack, and that's how I died. And St. Peter goes, geez, that's a heck of a story. He said, you better go in too. I said, I think you had a pretty bad day. So he takes the third guy aside and he says, what about you? What kind of day did you have? The guy says, I had the most miserable day of my life. He said, picture this. I'm naked. I'm hiding in a refrigerator.
That's it, folks.